Hi everyone, I'm Dale Smith, aka Journo Dale, and we're here to talk about Canadian politics. There's been a trend recently among a lot of civil society groups that are calling for citizen assemblies. What these are essentially a group of random people, however many they want to make up this assembly, that is approximately proportionate to the makeup of general society in terms of race, gender, ethnicity, economic class, so on, with the notion that they would get together, learn about a subject, and then come to a decision about what should be done. And we're hearing calls to make these citizen assemblies for things like electoral reform, or the climate policy, or transition to a green economy, and so on. And we're seeing a lot of these calls from a lot of groups, and it's kind of becoming a big trend or a fashion. We even saw at the NDP convention this past weekend where one of their policy resolutions is to call for Parliament to set up some kind of a citizens' assembly for electoral reform. And part of why these groups are doing this is because they figure it's an easier way to get things done. These small groups can come to some kind of a decision and be somehow representative of what the country thinks about a subject, and therefore we should act on what they decide because of how this kind of works. For electoral reform people as well, they are particularly encouraged because there was a citizen assembly in Ontario to decide what kind of electoral reform system they would propose that would go to a referendum. They chose a mixed member proportional system as part of this assembly, which the public then rejected during a referendum. And so you have a lot of these groups who are now thinking we should just have the assembly and be bound by what they decide rather than the referendum, because they're too problematic, as in their side can't win. Which is a problem, really, because you're looking to find an end run around democracy. And part of this romance is also this kind of beleaguered notion that this is some way of reinvigorating grassroots engagement with politics or with policy, which is also kind of broken because the way to do that should be through the grassroots policy process in political parties, which have atrophied because of so much centralization in leaders' offices. And that's something we should actually be looking to, revive and try and bring back to life, rather than trying to replicate that kind of a function with a citizens' assembly. But there's a couple of reasons why I think this particular romantic notion is actually dangerous to democracy. One of those is because it's about a lot of it is about laundering ideas that pre-exist, to ensure that you have this citizen group that comes up with it or that endorses it, which therefore somehow gives it added legitimacy, which isn't really the case. Particularly if you are trying to guide the assembly to come to this particular conclusion by selecting who they're listening to in terms of experts. And sure, you can have nonpartisan experts as part of this, but even nonpartisan experts will often have points of view or particular agendas. And if you can get the right experts to be guiding these citizen assemblies, then you can get a result that you're looking for. And that's a problem that people don't seem to want to really think about. The other problem is not only that it's laundering the ideas, but it's laundering the accountability. And the thing to remember with democracy is it's not just about voting. It's also about holding to account the people we voted for the last time. And that can mean voting them out if we're displeased or if they screw up or do a bad job or whatever. But you can't do that with a citizen assembly because it's a group of randoms, and nobody can vote them in and nobody can vote them out. And there's no way to hold what they decide to account, which is why it's particularly problematic when we want to turn over the responsibility for some very major policy ideas or proposals to these kinds of groups. Because if they decide wrong, or what they decide turns into a giant flaming disaster, we can't hold anyone to account for those decisions if we are bound by what they decide. And that's a real problem, because part of democracy is, like I said, holding to account the people who are in power so that we can make sure that either they don't stay in power or they are, punished at the ballot box or whatever. But if you have no mechanism to do that, you're not actually being democratic in there. You're just laundering the power and responsibility into a small group whose outcome you are trying to shape in its own particular way. There are plenty of criticisms to have about referendums in terms of they're not being as democratic as we like to think, because the people in power are the ones who shape the question and who interpret the results, which is problematic in and of itself. But when the notion, at least with a referendum, is that you get social buy-in for something, you don't get that social buy-in for these kinds of citizen assemblies. It's almost the opposite of that. It's removing itself from the social context under the guise that this is expert, that this is representative, that this is non-political or capital P political or non-partisan in any regard, because it's not included in the general political structure. But that creates a problem because we have no way of selecting or ensuring that what decisions get made out of this, that someone is accountable for them. And that's a problem. And it's a problem when you've got groups who purport to be looking to strengthen democracy and engagement, thinking that this is an answer for that, because it's not actually giving you proper democracy or engagement. It's a facsimile thereof, which is pretending to give you the democratic or social and grassroots engagement that you think that we need to be having, but it's not actually providing it through the structures that are in place. And we shouldn't keep thinking that this is the solution to our problems just because it's, nonpartisan or not political. It is political. It's small p political. But that's the thing is with why politics are messy, is because you have competing interests, and those interests need to be addressed in some way or another, which is why we have heated debates and why we have, the messiness that politics can be. And trying to do an end run around that is ignoring a lot of interests. It's ignoring particular points of view, which is not democratic. It's not quite autocratic, but it's putting a sheen on of democracy on a decision-making ability that really is creating more problems than it would solve. And so that's why I have a really big concern when we have all of these groups, whether it's Fair About Canada or Extinction Rebellion or the NDP, who think that a citizen assembly is the way that you're going to solve these problems. It's not. It's going to create other problems because what we are asking them to do is with a predetermined endpoint in mind. And I think that that's really a betrayal of what politics is supposed to be and how our system is supposed to work. And I think that we really need to sit down and think about what it is we think we are looking for when we're asking for citizen assemblies to make these decisions, because it's not actually in the best interests of everyone. It's with a specific goal in mind and trying to do an end run around the messy democratic process to get there. And that's not really something we should be thinking is a good thing. And that's everything for this week. Join us again next week for some more Canadian politics. I'm Dale Smith. It's at journo_Dale on Twitter and at journodale _no on Bluesky. And don't forget to like the video, share, subscribe, and support us on Patreon. Thanks, everyone.